Before the flames fell from the heavens, before the earth trembled beneath Sodom and Gomorrah, there was a secret, one whispered only among angels. They were not sent merely to destroy, but to hide something, a presence, a power, a God that heaven itself feared would be revealed. And when the fire consumed the cities, it wasn't just sin that was buried. It was the memory of a forgotten God. Tonight, we uncover the truth that angels dared not speak, the hidden God of Sodom. The year is approximately 2000 BC. The sun sets behind the Jordan Valley, casting long shadows across the fertile plains. In the distance, smoke rises from the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, not from destruction, but from the bustling life of two of the most prosperous settlements in the ancient world. By morning, both cities will be nothing more than ash and memory, their inhabitants reduced to silence, their secrets buried beneath fire and brimstone. But what if everything we've been told about that night is incomplete? What if the angels who descended upon Sodom were not merely executioners of divine wrath, but guardians of a secret so profound that entire civilizations had to be erased to contain it? Tonight, we're going to explore one of the most controversial theories in biblical archaeology and theological study. A theory that suggests the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was not about punishment for sin, but about silencing witnesses to something the divine realm never intended humanity to discover. This isn't just another retelling of a familiar story. This is an investigation into what the angels feared to reveal. The traditional narrative is straightforward enough. Genesis chapter 18 tells us that 3 visitors came to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre. 2 of these visitors were angels, and they carried a message of impending judgment. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, the Lord declares in Genesis 18, verse 20. I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. But here's where the familiar story takes an unexpected turn. When we examine the original Hebrew text, we find something curious. The word used for the angel's mission is not simply to judge or to punish. The Hebrew term suggests an investigation, a careful examination of something specific. They weren't just there to count sins, they were there to verify the existence of something particular, something that had reached the attention of the divine council. The Book of Enoch, one of the most significant apocryphal texts discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls, provides additional context that mainstream theology has largely ignored. In 1st Enoch, we learn that certain angels had already fallen from grace by revealing divine secrets to humanity. These revelations included knowledge of metallurgy, cosmetics, warfare, and most significantly, the names and functions of divine beings. Could it be that Sodom had become a repository for such forbidden knowledge? Archaeological evidence from the region supports the existence of sophisticated urban centers in the Dead Sea Valley during the Middle Bronze Age. These weren't primitive settlements. They were complex societies with advanced agriculture, trade networks, and religious practices. The sulfur deposits found throughout the region, once thought to be evidence of divine fire, are now understood to be natural formations that could have been ignited by seismic activity or underground gas deposits. But this geological explanation only deepens the mystery. If the destruction was natural, why does the biblical account insist on divine intervention? The answer may lie in what the inhabitants of these cities had discovered about the nature of divinity itself. When the 2 angels arrive in Sodom in Genesis 19, they encounter Lot sitting in the city gate. This detail is significant because the city gate was where judicial and commercial business was conducted. Lot wasn't just a resident, he held a position of authority. He was integrated into the social and religious fabric of the city. When he invites the angels to his home, he's not just offering hospitality, he's providing protection from something the text hints at but never fully explains. Now the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. Genesis 19, verse 1 tells us. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth. This is the posture of someone who recognizes divine beings immediately. But how did Lot know what they were? And more importantly, why was such recognition apparently common enough in Sodom that it posed a threat? The men of the city surround Lot's house, demanding that he bring out his visitors. The traditional interpretation focuses on the sexual nature of their demands, but ancient Near Eastern scholarship suggests something far more complex. The Hebrew word used here can mean to know in the carnal sense, but it more commonly means to know in terms of gaining knowledge or understanding. Could it be that the men of Sodom were demanding access to divine knowledge that they believed these visitors possessed? This interpretation aligns with patterns found throughout ancient Mesopotamian literature, where contact with divine beings was often sought for the purpose of gaining cosmic secrets. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish, and numerous other texts from the region describe humans attempting to extract divine knowledge from supernatural visitors. If Sodom had developed a culture centered around such practices, it would explain both the urgency of the divine response and the totality of the destruction that followed. The Book of Jubilees, another apocryphal text that was highly regarded in ancient Jewish communities, provides additional details about the pre-flood world and the activities of the Watchers, the angels who descended to earth and mingled with humanity. According to Jubilees, these angels taught humans not just practical skills, but theological concepts that were meant to remain hidden. They revealed the inner workings of the divine council, the true names of God, and the mechanisms by which the universe was governed. What if Sodom had become a center for preserving and practicing this forbidden knowledge? What if the city had developed religious practices that threatened the carefully maintained separation between the divine and human realms? The Qumran texts, discovered in the same caves that yielded the Dead Sea Scrolls, include fragmentary references to a hidden sanctuary and a forbidden cult that practiced divination using divine names. While these texts are often dismissed as sectarian fantasies, they may preserve authentic memories of pre-destruction religious practices in the Jordan Valley. The geographic references in these texts consistently point to the southern end of the Dead Sea, precisely where ancient tradition places Sodom and Gomorrah. When we examine the angels' behavior throughout the Sodom narrative, we find consistent evidence of reluctance and hesitation. They don't immediately declare their purpose. They attempt to remain in the city square rather than accepting Lot's hospitality. When forced to reveal their power by striking the attacking crowd with blindness, they do so with apparent reluctance. This is not the behavior of confident divine executioners. This is the behavior of beings who are deeply troubled by what they've been asked to do. "We are about to destroy this place," they tell Lot in Genesis 19, verse 13, "because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." But the Hebrew construction here is unusual. The phrase translated as outcry can also mean a secret revealed or a hidden thing brought to light. What if the angels weren't responding to cries for justice, but to the exposure of divine secrets that were never meant for human understanding? The destruction itself is described in terms that suggest both natural disaster and supernatural intervention. "The Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven," Genesis 19, verse 24 records. The repetition of "from the Lord" in this verse has puzzled translators for centuries. Why would the text emphasize twice that the destruction came from divine sources unless there was some question about its origin? Ancient Jewish commentary, preserved in the Talmudic tractates and Midrashic literature, suggests that this double attribution indicates two distinct divine actions: the decision to destroy and the method of destruction. According to these sources, the decision was made by the highest divine authority, but the method was chosen to ensure that no trace of the forbidden knowledge would survive. Fire doesn't just kill, it purifies. It erases not just physical structures, but spiritual contamination. The transformation of Lot's wife into a pillar of salt is often interpreted as punishment for disobedience. But ancient Near Eastern texts suggest another possibility. Salt was used in exorcism rituals throughout the region because it was believed to neutralize spiritual contamination. The transformation may not have been punitive, but protective, a way of ensuring that she couldn't carry whatever spiritual contamination she had been exposed to in Sodom into the outside world. This interpretation gains credibility when we consider the broader context of divine-human interaction in the ancient world. Throughout the Hebrew Bible and related literature, there's a consistent pattern of God limiting human access to divine knowledge. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil in Eden, the confounding of languages at Babel, the restriction of the priestly class to specific families, all point to a divine concern about humans gaining too much understanding of cosmic realities. The Enochian literature describes in detail how the revelation of divine secrets led to corruption and violence in the pre-flood world. According to these texts, the Watchers taught humanity about astronomy, agriculture, and craftsmanship. But they also revealed the secret names of God and the methods for compelling divine beings to grant human requests. This knowledge was seen as so dangerous that it required a global flood to erase it from human memory. If Sodom had become a repository for similar forbidden knowledge, its destruction takes on an entirely different significance. It wasn't divine wrath responding to human wickedness. It was divine damage control, an attempt to prevent the spread of information that could fundamentally alter the relationship between heaven and earth. The geographic isolation of Sodom and Gomorrah supports this theory. Located in the Jordan Valley, surrounded by wilderness and connected to the outside world by limited trade routes, these cities would have been ideal locations for preserving and practicing esoteric knowledge without widespread contamination. Their destruction could have been surgically precise, eliminating the threat without affecting the broader human population. Archaeological surveys of the region have revealed something fascinating: a sudden cessation of settlement in the area following the Middle Bronze Age, precisely when the biblical destruction would have occurred. This wasn't gradual abandonment due to changing trade routes or climate shifts. It was immediate and total, as if the entire region had been declared off-limits. Even more intriguing are the geological anomalies found throughout the southern Dead Sea Basin, layers of ash and sulfur deposits that don't match the natural geological processes of the region. Crystalline formations that suggest exposure to intense heat, but in patterns that seem inconsistent with volcanic activity or natural gas explosions. These findings don't prove supernatural intervention, but they do suggest that something extraordinary happened in this location during the time frame suggested by biblical chronology. The silence that follows the destruction is equally significant. Unlike other divine judgments recorded in biblical literature, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is rarely referenced in later texts. When it is mentioned, it's used as a warning about divine power, but the specific reasons for the destruction are never elaborated upon. This is unusual in a literary tradition that typically uses historical events as teaching tools, extracting moral and theological lessons for future generations. Could this silence be intentional? Could the later biblical authors have been instructed to minimize discussion of Sodom precisely because the full story contained information that was still considered too dangerous to reveal? The pattern of selective memory and deliberate forgetting is well documented in ancient Near Eastern cultures, particularly when it came to religious practices that were deemed threatening to social or cosmic order. The Dead Sea Scrolls community at Qumran apparently possessed additional texts about Sodom that were not included in the canonical biblical collection. Fragmentary references in their calendrical and liturgical documents suggest they had access to detailed accounts of what they called the hidden sanctuary and the forbidden worship that characterized the doomed cities. These texts were apparently considered so sensitive that they were never copied in their entirety, existing only as brief quotations embedded in other documents. What emerges from this investigation is a picture of Sodom not as a city destroyed for conventional moral failings, but as a civilization that had crossed a cosmic boundary, a place where the carefully maintained separation between divine and human knowledge had been breached, where angels feared to tread because of what they might be forced to reveal or suppress. Perhaps Sodom was not erased because of sin, but because it saw too much of the divine. The question that haunts theological scholars across centuries becomes more pressing when we examine the linguistic peculiarities embedded within the Hebrew text itself. The word Elohim, typically translated as God, appears in its plural form throughout the Sodom narrative, yet the verbs remain stubbornly singular. This grammatical inconsistency has puzzled translators for millennia. But what if it wasn't an inconsistency at all? What if it was evidence of multiple divine entities operating under a singular directive, a divine council making decisions that individual members found troubling? The Masoretic tradition preserves marginal notes that suggest ancient scribes were aware of textual difficulties surrounding the Sodom account. These notations, written in Aramaic and dating to the early medieval period, reference the hidden name and the concealed presence in ways that seem to indicate knowledge of suppressed textual variants. Modern critical scholarship has largely ignored these marginal comments, dismissing them as later theological speculation, but their consistency across multiple manuscript families suggests they may preserve authentic ancient traditions. When we turn to the apocryphal literature, we find tantalizing fragments that flesh out the biblical skeleton. The Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, a text that claims to preserve the final words of Jacob's sons, includes a curious passage from the Testament of Benjamin. "I saw in a vision the destruction of the righteous city," Benjamin declares, "and behold, a figure clothed in light stood among the flames, weeping for what must be destroyed to preserve what must be hidden." This figure clothed in light appears nowhere in the canonical account, yet similar descriptions emerge from multiple independent sources. The Apocalypse of Abraham, discovered among the Nag Hammadi texts, describes a divine being who stood in the midst of the burning and was not consumed, for he was both the destroyer and the destroyed, the revealer and the concealed. These references point toward a theological concept that mainstream Christianity and Judaism have struggled to address: the possibility that divine beings themselves can be in conflict over the revelation of cosmic truths. The destruction of Sodom may not have been a unanimous divine decision, but rather the result of a cosmic dispute about how much of the divine nature could safely be revealed to humanity. The Book of Jubilees provides what may be the most explicit account of this conflict. According to Jubilees chapter 16, the angels sent to Sodom carried with them tablets of the hidden covenant that were meant to be retrieved, not revealed. These tablets supposedly contained the true names of the divine council members and the methods by which they governed the cosmos. The text suggests that Sodom's inhabitants had somehow gained access to portions of this knowledge, creating a crisis that required immediate intervention. "And the angels feared greatly," Jubilees records, "for they knew that if this knowledge spread among the children of men, the order of heaven and earth would be overturned, and chaos would reign where once there was harmony." This fear wasn't rooted in divine pride or jealousy, but in genuine concern about humanity's capacity to handle cosmic responsibility. The archaeological record from the Dead Sea region reveals something that supports this interpretation. Excavations at sites like Bab ed-Dra and Numera, traditionally identified with Sodom and Gomorrah, have uncovered unusual cult objects that don't match known Canaanite religious practices. These artifacts include bronze tablets with inscriptions in an unknown script, stone altars with seven-sided geometric patterns, and ceramic vessels decorated with celestial maps that demonstrate sophisticated astronomical knowledge. Most intriguing are the metal amulets found in what appears to have been a temple complex at Bab ed-Dra. These amulets bear inscriptions that use a combination of early Hebrew letters and symbols that match descriptions found in medieval grimoires claiming to preserve angelic alphabets. While mainstream archaeology dismisses these connections as coincidental, the precision of the matches is remarkable. The Sefer Raziel, a medieval Jewish mystical text that claims to preserve knowledge given by the angel Raziel to Adam, contains detailed descriptions of divine hierarchies and cosmic mechanisms. While the text as we have it is clearly medieval in composition, it incorporates elements that scholars have traced to much earlier sources. Several passages describe the cities of knowledge that existed before the flood and were re-established afterward, only to be destroyed again when their inhabitants sought to climb the ladder of heaven through forbidden names. Could Sodom have been one of these cities of knowledge? The geographic positioning supports this possibility. Located at the lowest point on Earth's surface, the Dead Sea Basin was considered in ancient cosmology to be closest to the underworld, making it an ideal location for practices involving communication with supernatural entities. The unique mineral composition of the area, with its high concentration of salt and sulfur, was believed to facilitate spiritual purification and divine communication. The Zohar, the foundational text of Jewish mysticism, contains a cryptic passage about the city that saw the face of the Hidden One. According to this text, there was a place where divine beings walked openly among humans, sharing knowledge that was meant to remain concealed until the end of days. The inhabitants of this city became so accustomed to divine presence that they began to demand answers to cosmic questions that even angels were forbidden to address. They asked the names of the concealed ones, the Zohar records, and they sought to know the thoughts of the Ancient of Days before they were spoken into being. This was a transgression that reached to the throne itself, for there are secrets that must remain secret even from those who serve in the divine presence. The concept of divine secrets that must remain hidden even from angels appears throughout Jewish mystical literature, but it finds its most explicit expression in the Hekalah texts, which describe the heavenly palaces and the beings who inhabit them. According to these texts, there are 7 levels of divine secrecy, with the innermost secrets known only to the highest divine authority. Angels who serve in the outer courts are forbidden from approaching these inner mysteries, and any attempt to reveal them to humans results in immediate cosmic intervention. This framework provides a compelling explanation for the angels' behavior in the Sodom narrative. Their reluctance to enter the city, their apparent discomfort with their mission, and their urgent insistence on immediate departure all align with the behavior of beings who are operating at the very limits of their authority, dealing with matters that approach the boundaries of what they themselves are permitted to know. The destruction itself takes on new meaning when viewed through this lens. The fire and brimstone from heaven becomes not merely an instrument of punishment, but a cosmic sterilization process designed to eliminate all traces of contamination. The thoroughness of the destruction, leaving no survivors except Lot's family, suggests not divine wrath, but divine necessity. Every witness to whatever had been revealed in Sodom had to be silenced, not out of cruelty, but out of cosmic responsibility. The transformation of Lot's wife gains additional significance in this context. Her metamorphosis into salt wasn't punishment for curiosity, but the inevitable result of exposure to divine knowledge that human consciousness cannot contain. Salt, in ancient Near Eastern thought, was the ultimate purifying agent, capable of neutralizing spiritual contamination. Her transformation may have been an act of mercy, preserving her essence while preventing the spread of dangerous knowledge. The silence that Abraham maintains throughout his bargaining with the divine visitor becomes equally meaningful. When he pleads for the city's preservation, he argues from principles of justice and mercy, but he never asks what specific transgression has triggered such extreme intervention. This suggests that Abraham understood the nature of the crisis and recognized that some questions cannot be asked, even by those who walk closely with the divine. The covenant relationship between Abraham and the divine takes on new dimensions when we consider that he may have been privy to cosmic secrets that were denied to the inhabitants of Sodom. His willingness to sacrifice Isaac, his acceptance of circumcision, his departure from his homeland, all suggest a level of trust that comes from understanding the true stakes of cosmic order. Abraham's silence about Sodom may have been part of his covenant obligations, a recognition that some knowledge must be contained within carefully chosen boundaries. The geographical isolation imposed on the region following the destruction supports this interpretation. According to biblical and extra-biblical sources, the area around the Dead Sea became a wasteland not because of divine curse, but because of divine quarantine. The land itself had been contaminated by exposure to forbidden knowledge, making it unsuitable for normal human habitation. This quarantine explains why later biblical texts rarely elaborate on the specific reasons for Sodom's destruction. It wasn't that the authors didn't know the details, but that they understood the necessity of maintaining the silence that the angels had died to preserve. The story was told in sufficient detail to serve as a warning about the dangers of transgressing cosmic boundaries, but not in enough detail to provide a roadmap for repeating the transgression. The emergence of mystery religions throughout the ancient Near East, following the Middle Bronze Age, may represent humanity's continued attempt to recover the knowledge that was lost with Sodom. The Eleusinian mysteries, the Orphic cults, the various Gnostic traditions all claim to possess secret knowledge about the nature of divinity and the cosmos. Their emphasis on initiation, secrecy, and gradual revelation suggests an understanding that divine knowledge must be carefully controlled and dispensed only to those prepared to handle its implications. The Dead Sea Scrolls community at Qumran apparently saw themselves as guardians of this principle. Their emphasis on ritual purity, their careful restriction of access to their most sacred texts, and their expectation of cosmic renewal all point toward a community that understood the dangers of uncontrolled revelation. They preserved fragments of texts that claimed to describe the former destructions and the cities of knowledge, but they did so with elaborate safeguards designed to prevent the information from spreading beyond their carefully chosen initiates. Perhaps most significantly, the Qumran texts include references to a figure they call the hidden teacher, or the concealed instructor, who possessed knowledge that was too wonderful for the sons of men. This figure is described as dwelling in places where fire and salt have made the earth clean, a clear reference to the Dead Sea region. The texts suggest that this hidden teacher continued to provide guidance to those who were worthy, but only through carefully controlled revelation that would not repeat the cosmic catastrophe of the earlier cities. The theological implications of this interpretation extend far beyond the specific narrative of Sodom and Gomorrah. If divine knowledge exists that is too dangerous for human consciousness to contain, it raises fundamental questions about the nature of revelation itself. How much of divine truth can humanity safely receive? What are the cosmic consequences of transgressing these boundaries? And perhaps most troubling, what other divine secrets remain hidden precisely because their revelation would require similar interventions? The angels who destroyed Sodom may have been the guardians of cosmic order itself, protecting not just the divine realm from human presumption, but humanity from knowledge that would destroy the very fabric of created reality. Their fear was not of human rebellion, but of human annihilation through exposure to truths too vast for finite minds to contain. In this light, the destruction of Sodom becomes not an act of divine anger, but an act of divine love, a cosmic surgery performed to save both heaven and earth from catastrophic revelation. The angels feared not what they might have to reveal, but what they might have to destroy to keep it hidden. The mystery deepens when we consider that the knowledge preserved in Sodom may not have been entirely eliminated, but merely scattered and concealed in ways that prevent its dangerous concentration. The proliferation of mystical traditions throughout the ancient world, each claiming to possess fragments of ultimate truth, may represent the dispersed remnants of what was once concentrated in the cities of the plain. The question that emerges from these scattered fragments is whether the divine presence in Sodom was not foreign, but familiar, not an invader, but a resident. The Hebrew text contains a linguistic anomaly that has puzzled scholars for generations. In Genesis 19, verse 24, the destruction is attributed to the Lord twice in a single verse, but the second attribution uses a different divine name entirely. Where the first reference uses the tetragrammaton, the ineffable name of God, the second uses a term that appears nowhere else in biblical literature. This unique divine name, transliterated as Adonai El Nistar, literally means the Lord God of the hidden. Ancient rabbinical commentaries acknowledge this textual peculiarity but offer no explanation for its singular appearance. The Talmudic tractate Sanhedrin contains a cryptic reference to this verse, stating only that there are names that may not be spoken and places where they once were spoken, and these places are no more. The implication is staggering. What if Sodom housed not just forbidden knowledge about the divine, but a divine presence itself? What if the city had become the earthly dwelling place of an aspect of God that was meant to remain hidden from human awareness? This would explain not just the urgency of the intervention, but the cosmic scope of the cover-up that followed. The Book of Enoch describes beings called the Hidden Ones, divine entities who exist in the spaces between the known hierarchies of heaven. According to Enochian cosmology, these beings serve functions so fundamental to cosmic order that their very existence must remain concealed from created consciousness. They are not fallen angels or rebellious spirits, but rather aspects of divinity that operate beyond the boundaries of revelation. There are those who serve in the hidden courts, 1 Enoch chapter 41 records, and their service is known only to the Ancient of Days. Should their presence be revealed among the children of men, the foundations of earth and heaven would tremble, for mortals were not made to look upon the face of the concealed glory. This concept of concealed divine glory appears throughout Jewish mystical literature, but it finds its most detailed expression in the medieval Sefer HaBahir, which describes 7 levels of divine hiddenness. According to this text, the deepest level of concealment involves divine aspects that cannot reveal themselves directly, but can only be approached through intermediary manifestations. The text suggests that in the antediluvian world, and again in certain post-flood locations, these hidden aspects found ways to manifest more directly, creating crises that required immediate divine intervention. Archaeological evidence from the Dead Sea region supports the possibility of sustained divine presence. Excavations at multiple sites have uncovered structures that defy conventional religious architecture. These buildings contain chambers with acoustic properties that suggest they were designed for specific types of sound or vibration. The walls are covered with geometric patterns that match descriptions found in Ezekiel's vision of the divine chariot. Patterns that were supposedly revealed only to prophets in the most extreme states of spiritual elevation. Most intriguingly, these chambers contain altars made from a type of stone that doesn't occur naturally in the region. Geological analysis has traced the stone to the Sinai Peninsula, specifically to areas that biblical tradition associates with direct divine manifestation. The effort required to transport these massive stones across hundreds of miles of wilderness suggests that the builders considered their presence essential to the function of these sacred spaces. The carbon dating of organic materials found in these chambers presents another puzzle. While the structures themselves appear to date to the Middle Bronze Age, consistent with the traditional dating of Sodom and Gomorrah, some of the organic residues return dates that are significantly older, suggesting continuous use of these sites across multiple historical periods. This pattern of extended sacred use is consistent with locations that were believed to house permanent divine presence. The Qumran community preserved texts that refer explicitly to the dwelling of the hidden and the sanctuary of the concealed name. These texts describe elaborate rituals designed to approach divine aspects that could not be directly addressed. The rituals involved specific combinations of sacred names, geometric arrangements of participants, and the use of substances that could facilitate what the texts call veiled communion. "Blessed is he who approaches the hidden without seeking to unveil," one fragment declares. "Blessed is he who serves the concealed without demanding revelation, for there are aspects of the Holy One that must remain hidden, even from the seraphim who cry, 'Holy, holy, holy,' before the throne." This theology of necessary concealment provides a framework for understanding the cosmic crisis that Sodom represented. If the city had developed practices that successfully unveiled aspects of divinity meant to remain hidden, it would have created a theological emergency that transcended conventional categories of sin and punishment. The issue wasn't moral failure, but cosmic violation. The angelic mission to Sodom takes on new meaning in this context. The two angels weren't simply divine executioners, but rather cosmic repair agents, sent to restore the boundaries between revealed and concealed aspects of divinity. Their reluctance and apparent distress throughout the narrative reflects the tragedy of the situation. They weren't destroying evil, but eliminating a form of divine presence that had become dangerously exposed. The bargaining scene between Abraham and the divine visitor gains additional layers of meaning when viewed through this lens. Abraham's repeated attempts to negotiate for the city's preservation may not have been motivated by concern for its inhabitants, but by understanding of what would be lost if the hidden divine presence were withdrawn. His final acceptance of the city's fate suggests recognition that some forms of divine revelation are too dangerous to preserve, regardless of their intrinsic value. The destruction itself is described in terms that suggest not just physical annihilation, but metaphysical erasure. The Hebrew phrase translated as fire and brimstone literally means purifying flame and covering dust. This wasn't merely a weapon of destruction, but a cosmic process designed to seal away traces of divine presence that had become too visible. The aftermath of the destruction reveals the success of this sealing process. The entire region became known as a place where divine presence was notably absent. Later, biblical texts describe the Dead Sea area as a wasteland where nothing grows, where life cannot flourish, where even birds avoid flying overhead. This description matches what would be expected if divine presence had been not just withdrawn, but actively concealed behind barriers that prevented its return. The transformation of Lot's wife becomes, in this interpretation, not punishment, but metamorphosis. Her conversion to salt represents the crystallization of someone who had been exposed to divine presence in its unveiled form. Salt, in ancient Near Eastern thought, was the substance that remained when all other elements had been purified away. Her transformation preserved her essence while preventing her from carrying dangerous divine exposure into the outside world. Lot's own survival, along with his daughters, suggests that he had somehow managed to maintain proper boundaries in his interaction with the hidden divine presence. His immediate recognition of the angels, his insistence on providing them shelter, and his urgent compliance with their instructions all point to someone who understood the cosmic stakes involved and acted accordingly. The silence that surrounds the specific details of Sodom's transgression in later biblical texts becomes explicable as necessary theological discretion. The authors weren't hiding moral failures, but protecting cosmic secrets. They preserved enough of the story to serve as a warning about the dangers of improper divine encounter, but not enough to provide a roadmap for repeating the violation. The emergence of apocalyptic literature in the centuries following the destruction may represent humanity's attempt to process the theological implications of what had occurred. Texts like Daniel, Ezekiel, and Revelation all describe visions of divine reality that push the boundaries of what can safely be revealed. But they do so within carefully controlled prophetic frameworks that prevent the kind of direct, sustained exposure that apparently characterized Sodom. The Dead Sea Scrolls community appears to have understood themselves as guardians against the repetition of Sodom's mistake. Their elaborate purity codes, their restriction of access to sacred texts, and their expectation of cosmic renewal all suggest a community organized around the principle that divine revelation must be carefully controlled and gradually dispensed. The war scroll found at Qumran describes an eschatological battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, but it also references a third category, the sons of the hidden, who serve divine purposes that cannot be revealed until the end of days. This suggests that the Qumran community believed that aspects of divinity remained concealed even from them. and that their role was to maintain the boundaries that protected both heaven and earth from premature revelation. The concept of premature revelation appears throughout Jewish mystical literature, always associated with cosmic catastrophe. The Zohar describes several historical instances where divine secrets were revealed before their proper time, resulting in destruction that served to restore cosmic balance. The destruction of Sodom appears to be the archetypal example of this pattern. Perhaps most significantly, these texts suggest that the hidden aspect of divinity that was revealed in Sodom continues to exist, but remains concealed behind the barriers that were established through the city's destruction. The fire that consumed Sodom didn't eliminate this divine presence, but rather created a cosmic seal that prevents its premature reemergence. This interpretation explains the persistent fascination that the Sodom narrative has exercised throughout history. It's not simply a moral tale about divine judgment, but a theological mystery about the nature of divine hiddenness itself. The story continues to resonate because it touches on fundamental questions about how much of divine reality human consciousness can safely encounter. The archaeological silence that characterizes the Dead Sea region following the Middle Bronze Age may reflect not just the physical destruction of cities, but the establishment of a cosmic quarantine zone. The area became unsuitable for normal human habitation, not because of lingering physical contamination, but because of metaphysical barriers designed to prevent the reemergence of dangerous divine presence. Modern attempts to locate the exact sites of Sodom and Gomorrah may be frustrated not by the passage of time or geological changes, but by the success of the concealment process that was initiated by their destruction. The cities may remain hidden not beneath layers of earth and salt, but behind veils of cosmic secrecy that prevent their rediscovery. The theological implications extend far beyond biblical studies into fundamental questions about the nature of divine revelation itself. If aspects of divinity exist that must remain concealed for cosmic safety, it challenges traditional assumptions about the ultimate goal of religious experience. Rather than seeking maximum revelation of divine truth, perhaps the highest spiritual achievement involves recognizing and respecting the boundaries of what can safely be known. The angels who destroyed Sodom may have been not just executing divine judgment, but preserving divine mystery itself. Their fear was not of human rebellion against divine authority, but of human exposure to divine reality that would prove mutually destructive. They feared not what they might be forced to reveal, but what revelation itself might destroy. In this light, the narrative of Sodom and Gomorrah becomes not a story about divine wrath responding to human wickedness, but about divine love protecting human existence from truth too vast to contain. The destruction was an act of cosmic surgery, removing a theological cancer that threatened the stability of both heaven and earth. The hidden god of Sodom may not have been a foreign deity or fallen angel, but an aspect of the true God that had revealed itself too completely, too directly, in ways that created existential crisis for both divine and human consciousness. The angels came not to punish idolatry, but to restore the hiddenness that makes divine-human relationship possible. The mystery endures because the boundaries established through Sodom's destruction remain in effect. The hidden God remains hidden, the concealed divine presence remains concealed, and the cosmic order continues to depend on the maintenance of these essential distinctions between revealed and secret aspects of ultimate reality. Perhaps the greatest theological insight preserved in the Sodom narrative is the recognition that love sometimes requires concealment, that divine mercy may express itself through divine hiddenness, and that the highest form of revelation may be the wisdom to know what must remain unrevealed. The fire that fell from heaven over Sodom was not the flame of wrath, but the fire of protection, sealing away divine truth too dangerous for created consciousness to bear. The angels feared not the revelation of divine secrets, but the cosmic consequences of allowing those secrets to remain exposed. The implications of this theological catastrophe ripple forward through millennia, manifesting in ways that modern scholarship is only beginning to recognize. When we examine the development of monotheistic traditions following the Middle Bronze Age, we discover a curious pattern of theological anxiety surrounding the concept of divine multiplicity. The Shema, Judaism's central declaration that the Lord our God, the Lord is one, emerged not as a simple affirmation of monotheism, but as what appears to be a defensive theological position against something more complex and potentially dangerous. The Dead Sea Scrolls preserve fragments of what scholars call the Songs of the Sabbath Sacrifice, liturgical texts that describe the heavenly temple and its divine inhabitants. These texts reveal a cosmology far more complex than mainstream biblical theology acknowledges, with multiple divine beings, heavenly councils, and hierarchical structures that suggest the divine realm contains aspects and personalities that operate with considerable independence. The careful restrictions placed on access to these texts within the Qumran community suggest they understood the dangerous implications of such revelations. When we trace the linguistic evolution of divine names throughout ancient Near Eastern texts, we find evidence of systematic suppression. Terms that appear in early Mesopotamian and Canaanite sources describing multiple divine aspects or hidden divine names gradually disappear from later Hebrew texts, replaced by generic titles like Lord or God of Heaven. This isn't simply theological refinement, but what appears to be deliberate obfuscation of divine complexity that was once openly acknowledged. The Testament of Solomon, a pseudepigraphic text that claims to preserve the magical practices of Israel's wisest king, contains detailed descriptions of divine names and angelic hierarchies that were supposedly used to control supernatural forces. While mainstream scholarship dismisses these texts as medieval fantasy, their consistent references to the name that was spoken in the city of salt and the presence that dwelt where fire fell from heaven suggest they may preserve authentic memories of pre-destruction theological practices. Archaeological excavations throughout the Levant have uncovered evidence of what researchers call suppression layers, archaeological strata that show evidence of deliberate destruction and covering of religious sites during the Middle Bronze Age. These layers are characterized not by typical conquest debris, but by careful burial of cult objects and systematic filling of sacred spaces with purifying materials like salt and sulfur. The pattern is too widespread and too systematic to represent random destruction, suggesting a coordinated effort to eliminate specific types of religious practice. The copper scroll found at Qumran, which describes the locations of hidden temple treasures, includes cryptic references to items buried where the angels wept and beneath the salt of remembrance. While most scholars interpret these as references to conventional temple vessels, some of the described objects don't match any known religious artifacts. Items described as tablets of the hidden covenant and vessels of the concealed fire suggest religious objects associated with practices that were deemed too dangerous to preserve openly. The influence of Sodom's destruction on subsequent religious development becomes apparent when we examine the elaborate restrictions that surrounded divine encounter in the later Israelite religion. The construction of the tabernacle, with its multiple veils and restricted access areas, represents not just reverence for divine holiness, but systematic barriers designed to prevent the kind of direct divine exposure that apparently characterized Sodom. The death penalties associated with improper approach to the divine presence reflect not arbitrary divine authority, but cosmic necessity based on hard-learned experience. The priestly traditions preserved in Leviticus and Numbers contain detailed protocols for managing divine presence that read less like worship instructions and more like safety procedures. The requirements for specific materials, precise measurements, and exact ritual sequences all point toward practices designed to control and contain divine manifestation rather than simply facilitate it. These aren't the arbitrary requirements of a demanding deity, but the necessary precautions for managing forces that had previously proven catastrophically uncontrollable. The concept of divine jealousy that appears throughout Hebrew scripture takes on new meaning when viewed through the lens of the Sodom catastrophe. The repeated warnings against worshiping other gods may not refer to foreign deities, but to aspects of the true God that had become dangerously separated from divine unity. The first commandment's prohibition against graven images extends beyond idol worship to encompass any attempt to capture or contain divine presence in ways that might lead to uncontrolled manifestation. The prophetic literature contains numerous references to divine secrets that must remain hidden until appointed times. Isaiah speaks of the former things that are too wonderful for words, and Jeremiah references the ancient paths that were made desolate for a purpose. These cryptic passages may preserve memories of the theological knowledge that was eliminated with Sodom, knowledge that the prophets understood was both authentic and dangerous. The Book of Ezekiel provides what may be the most explicit post-Sodom description of controlled divine revelation. The prophet's elaborate vision of the divine chariot with its multiple faces, wheels within wheels, and carefully described geometric patterns represents divine reality filtered through protective symbolic structures. Even in this highly mediated form, the encounter leaves Ezekiel overwhelmed and requires extensive recovery time. This suggests that even controlled divine revelation pushes the boundaries of what human consciousness can safely process. The development of Jewish mystical traditions following the destruction of the Second Temple appears to represent humanity's continued attempt to recover the knowledge that was lost with Sodom, but within carefully controlled frameworks designed to prevent catastrophic exposure. The Merkava traditions, with their emphasis on gradual preparation, ritual purification, and protective practices, acknowledge both the reality and the danger of direct divine encounter. The Sefer Yetzirah, or Book of Creation, describes the process by which divine speech brings reality into existence, but it does so through elaborate symbolic systems that prevent direct access to the creative divine names. The text repeatedly warns against attempting to pronounce certain combinations of letters or to visualize specific divine configurations without proper preparation and protection. These warnings reflect hard-earned wisdom about the dangers of uncontrolled divine revelation. The medieval development of Kabbalah represents the most sophisticated attempt to systematize access to divine secrets while maintaining the boundaries established through Sodom's destruction. The concept of the Sephirot, divine emanations that mediate between the infinite divine source and finite creation, provides a framework for approaching divine reality without risking direct exposure to aspects of divinity that must remain concealed. The Zohar's discussion of divine hiddenness includes explicit references to the city that saw too much and the place where concealment was broken. These passages describe Sodom not as a center of moral corruption, but as a location where the boundaries between revealed and hidden aspects of divinity collapsed, creating a theological crisis that required immediate intervention. The text suggests that the knowledge preserved in Sodom was not inherently evil, but inherently dangerous to both divine and human existence. Archaeological evidence from medieval Jewish communities reveals the persistence of practices that may derive from pre-destruction traditions. Excavations of ancient synagogues have uncovered hidden chambers containing objects that don't match conventional religious artifacts. Stone tablets with inscriptions in unknown scripts, metal vessels with geometric patterns that match descriptions from apocalyptic literature, and crystalline formations that suggest exposure to intense heat all point toward the preservation of practices and objects that mainstream religious authorities would have found problematic. The persecution of Jewish mystical practitioners throughout medieval Europe may have been motivated not just by Christian theological concerns, but by recognition that these traditions preserved knowledge that was potentially dangerous to cosmic stability. The careful restrictions placed on mystical study, requiring extensive preparation and community oversight, reflect awareness that these practices approached the boundaries of what could safely be revealed. The emergence of Christian mystical traditions shows similar patterns of controlled revelation and protective concealment. The writings of figures like Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite describe divine reality in terms of dazzling darkness and luminous obscurity, acknowledging that divine truth exists in forms that human consciousness cannot directly apprehend. The development of apophatic theology, emphasizing what cannot be said about God rather than what can be said, reflects theological wisdom gained from understanding the dangers of excessive revelation. Islamic traditions preserve similar awareness of divine hiddenness and the dangers of uncontrolled revelation. The concept of the 99 names of Allah acknowledges divine complexity while maintaining protective boundaries around the greatest name that encompasses all divine reality. The restrictions placed on certain forms of dhikr and the elaborate preparations required for advanced mystical practices reflect understanding that divine encounter must be carefully managed to prevent catastrophic exposure. The Sufi traditions contain explicit references to cities of knowledge that were destroyed to prevent the spread of dangerous divine secrets. The writings of Ibn Arabi describe the stations of concealment, where divine aspects that cannot be revealed to creation maintain their hiddenness. These traditions suggest that the pattern established through Sodom's destruction continues to operate, maintaining cosmic stability through the preservation of necessary divine mystery. The archaeological silence that characterizes potential Sodom sites may reflect not just physical destruction, but ongoing metaphysical concealment. Modern attempts to locate the cities using satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and other advanced technologies consistently return inconclusive results, as if the sites themselves resist rediscovery. This pattern of archaeological elusiveness extends to other locations that ancient sources associate with dangerous divine revelation. The persistent fascination with Sodom throughout popular culture reflects humanity's continuing desire to understand what was lost in the destruction. From medieval mystery plays to modern archaeological documentaries, the story continues to generate interest that goes beyond its moral or historical significance. This suggests that the narrative touches on fundamental aspects of human consciousness that recognize, even if they cannot articulate, the cosmic significance of what occurred in the Jordan Valley. The theological implications extend into contemporary discussions about the nature of divine revelation and religious experience. If aspects of divine reality exist that must remain hidden for cosmic safety, it challenges modern assumptions about religious transparency and the ultimate goals of spiritual seeking. Rather than pursuing maximum divine revelation, perhaps authentic religious wisdom involves recognizing and respecting the boundaries of what can safely be known. The environmental peculiarities of the Dead Sea region continue to manifest in ways that suggest ongoing metaphysical effects. The area's unique ecosystem, with its extreme salinity, unusual mineral deposits, and notable absence of certain forms of life, may reflect not just geological processes, but metaphysical boundaries that were established through the ancient destruction. The region's resistance to normal agricultural development, despite modern irrigation and soil treatment technologies, suggests forces that operate beyond conventional physical laws. Modern mystical traditions continue to report unusual experiences in the Dead Sea region, ranging from vivid dreams to unexplained visions. While mainstream academia dismisses these reports as psychological projection or cultural conditioning, their consistency across different religious and cultural backgrounds suggests something more significant may be occurring. The region appears to continue serving as a boundary zone where the normal rules of divine-human interaction are altered in ways that both facilitate and restrict spiritual experience. The development of modern physics has introduced concepts that parallel ancient theological concerns about hidden reality and the dangers of uncontrolled revelation. Quantum mechanics describes aspects of reality that cannot be directly observed without fundamentally altering their nature. The uncertainty principle suggests that some forms of knowledge are mutually exclusive, that gaining certain types of information necessarily obscures others. These scientific insights provide contemporary frameworks for understanding why certain divine truths might need to remain concealed. The ecological movement has begun to recognize patterns in nature that suggest systematic concealment of information that could prove dangerous if widely known. The location of certain mineral deposits, the distribution of specific plant and animal species, and the occurrence of geological formations all appear to follow patterns that prevent the concentration of potentially hazardous resources. This suggests that concealment and protective hiddenness may be fundamental principles of cosmic organization rather than arbitrary divine decisions. The psychological research into religious experience has identified consistent patterns suggesting that human consciousness has built-in limitations on the types and intensities of spiritual encounter it can safely process. Studies of mystical experience, near-death encounters, and altered states of consciousness all indicate that excessive exposure to transcendent reality can result in permanent psychological damage. These findings provide scientific validation for ancient theological concerns about the dangers of uncontrolled divine revelation. The anthropological study of religious traditions worldwide reveals universal patterns of protective concealment surrounding the most sacred aspects of tribal and traditional religions. From Australian Aboriginal sacred sites to Native American Vision Quest locations, indigenous traditions consistently maintain restrictions on access to places and practices associated with direct divine encounter. These patterns suggest that the wisdom preserved in the Sodom narrative reflects universal human understanding about the necessity of maintaining boundaries around certain types of spiritual experience. The ongoing archaeological investigation of the Dead Sea region continues to yield discoveries that challenge conventional understanding of the area's ancient history. Recent excavations have uncovered evidence of sophisticated urban planning, advanced metallurgy, and religious practices that don't match known Bronze Age cultures. These discoveries suggest that the civilizations that existed in the region before the Middle Bronze Age destruction may have achieved levels of cultural and spiritual sophistication that mainstream archaeology has not adequately recognized. The interdisciplinary study of the Sodom narrative, combining archaeological evidence, textual analysis, and theological investigation, reveals a story far more complex and significant than traditional interpretations have acknowledged. Rather than a simple moral tale about divine judgment on human wickedness, the narrative preserves memories of a cosmic crisis that required intervention at the highest levels of divine authority. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah represents not divine wrath, but divine wisdom, protecting both heaven and earth from revelation that would have proved mutually destructive. The angels who descended upon Sodom carried with them not just the instruments of destruction, but the weight of cosmic responsibility. Their mission required them to eliminate not evil, but excess, to restore boundaries that had been transgressed, not through human rebellion, but through human achievement. They feared not the revelation of divine secrets, but the cosmic consequences of allowing those secrets to remain exposed in forms that created existential crisis for both divine and human consciousness. The hidden God of Sodom remains hidden, concealed behind barriers that were established through fire and maintained through silence. The cosmic order continues to depend on the preservation of these essential distinctions between what can be revealed and what must remain concealed. The theological wisdom preserved in the narrative recognizes that love sometimes requires hiddenness, that divine mercy may express itself through divine mystery, and that the highest form of revelation may be the recognition of what must remain unrevealed. The fire that consumed the cities of the plain was not the flame of judgment, but the fire of protection, sealing away divine presence that had become too visible, too accessible, too dangerous in its unveiled form. The angels came not as executioners of divine wrath, but as surgeons of cosmic order, performing the painful but necessary operation of restoring the hiddenness that makes divine-human relationship possible. The story endures because it touches on fundamental questions about the nature of divine reality and human capacity for spiritual encounter. It preserves essential wisdom about the boundaries of revelation and the cosmic necessity of maintaining protective concealment around aspects of divine truth that finite consciousness cannot safely contain. The narrative serves not as a warning about divine punishment for human wickedness, but as recognition of divine love that protects human existence from truth too vast and terrible to bear. In the end, perhaps Sodom was not destroyed because it was evil, but because it was too successful in its spiritual seeking. Perhaps the hidden God that dwelt there was not a foreign deity or fallen angel, but an aspect of ultimate divine reality that had revealed itself too completely, too directly, in ways that threatened the cosmic balance between hiddenness and revelation that keeps both heaven and earth in proper order. The angels feared not what they might be forced to reveal, but what revelation itself might destroy. Their mission was not punishment, but preservation, not judgment, but protection, not wrath, but love expressed through the ultimate sacrifice of allowing divine hiddenness to be restored through the elimination of divine presence that had become dangerously exposed. The mystery of Sodom endures because the boundaries it established remain in effect, protecting human consciousness from divine reality too vast to comprehend and preserving cosmic order through the maintenance of essential distinctions between revealed and concealed aspects of ultimate truth. The hidden God remains hidden, the cosmic secrets remain secret, and the universe continues to depend on the wisdom of knowing what must never be fully known. Be fully known. The theological earthquake that originated in the Jordan Valley continues to reverberate through contemporary religious scholarship in ways that few mainstream institutions are willing to acknowledge. When we examine the distribution of mystical traditions throughout the post-Bronze Age world, we discover a curious pattern of fragmentation and concealment that suggests the systematic dispersal of knowledge that was once concentrated in specific geographical locations. The Gnostic traditions that emerged throughout the Mediterranean world during the Hellenistic period claimed to possess secret knowledge about the true nature of divine reality. These traditions consistently reference the cities of salt and the places where fire fell from heaven as sources of their hidden teachings. While Orthodox Christianity dismissed these claims as heretical fantasy, the consistency of these references across geographically and culturally distinct Gnostic communities suggests they may have preserved authentic memories of pre-destruction theological practices. The Mandaean communities of southern Mesopotamia, who claim to be the last surviving practitioners of pre-Christian baptismal traditions, preserve texts that describe the great concealment that occurred when the Watchers wept over what they were commanded to destroy. Their ritual texts include prayers for those who were silenced that silence might be preserved, and ceremonial washings that are said to purify participants from the salt of ancient knowledge. Archaeological surveys of the broader Dead Sea region have revealed a pattern of site abandonment that extends far beyond the immediate vicinity of the traditional Sodom and Gomorrah locations. Dozens of Bronze Age settlements throughout the Jordan Valley show evidence of simultaneous abandonment during the same time period, suggesting that the destruction was part of a larger regional depopulation event. This pattern is inconsistent with normal patterns of urban decline or conquest, pointing toward a coordinated evacuation that may have been motivated by theological rather than political concerns. The linguistic analysis of Hebrew and related Semitic languages reveals evidence of systematic vocabulary suppression during the period following the Middle Bronze Age. Terms related to direct divine encounter, angelic hierarchies, and theophanic experience gradually disappear from common usage, replaced by more generic religious terminology. This linguistic evolution suggests not natural language development, but deliberate obfuscation of concepts that were deemed too dangerous for general circulation. The Cairo Geniza, a medieval repository of Jewish texts discovered in the 19th century, contained fragments that reference the hidden sanctuary texts and the concealed name traditions that were supposedly preserved by secret lineages of scholars. These fragments describe elaborate precautions taken to prevent the reconcentration of knowledge that had been scattered by fire and sealed by salt. The texts suggest that medieval Jewish communities understood themselves to be guardians against the repetition of ancient theological catastrophes. The development of Islamic esoteric traditions shows similar patterns of careful knowledge management. The writings of early Sufi masters contain references to the stations of the concealed and the cities that knew too much of the divine presence. These texts describe spiritual practices designed to approach divine reality without transgressing the boundaries that were established through the Great Concealment. The emphasis on gradual initiation and careful preparation in Sufi traditions reflects awareness that uncontrolled mystical experience can result in cosmic catastrophe. The Christian mystical traditions that emerged during the medieval period developed elaborate theological frameworks for understanding divine hiddenness and the necessity of concealment. The writings of figures like Meister Eckhart describe the desert of divinity, where divine aspects exist that cannot be revealed without destroying both revealer and recipient. These traditions suggest that medieval Christianity preserved awareness of divine reality that must remain hidden for cosmic safety. The archaeological investigation of medieval religious sites throughout Europe has uncovered evidence of hidden chambers and concealed texts that suggest the preservation of theological knowledge that was deemed too dangerous for open practice. These discoveries include stone tablets with inscriptions that match descriptions from apocalyptic literature, ritual objects that don't correspond to known Christian practices, and architectural features designed to facilitate specific types of spiritual experience while maintaining protective barriers. The persistence of popular traditions surrounding the Dead Sea region reveals continuing awareness of the area's theological significance. Local Bedouin communities preserve oral traditions about the place where angels wept and the salt that remembers the hidden name. These traditions describe the region as a boundary zone where normal spiritual rules are suspended, where divine presence can be encountered but not safely approached. The modern study of consciousness and religious experience has identified neurological patterns that support ancient theological concerns about the dangers of excessive divine revelation. Research into mystical states, religious ecstasy, and transcendent experience reveals that human consciousness has built-in protective mechanisms that limit exposure to certain types of spiritual intensity. These findings suggest that the restrictions surrounding divine encounter in ancient traditions may have been based on empirical understanding of psychological and neurological limitations. The quantum mechanical principle of complementarity, which describes how certain aspects of reality cannot be simultaneously observed, provides a contemporary framework for understanding ancient theological concepts about divine hiddenness. Just as quantum particles exist in states that are fundamentally altered by observation, divine reality may exist in forms that are necessarily changed by revelation. The destruction of Sodom may have been motivated by understanding that certain aspects of divine truth cannot be revealed without fundamentally altering both the divine and human consciousness involved in the encounter. The ecological study of the Dead Sea region continues to reveal anomalies that suggest ongoing metaphysical effects from the ancient destruction. The area's unique biogeochemistry, with its extreme mineral concentrations and unusual atmospheric conditions, creates an environment that is simultaneously hostile to normal life and conducive to altered states of consciousness. This suggests that the region continues to serve as a boundary zone between normal and transcendent reality. The astronomical analysis of ancient Near Eastern texts reveals sophisticated knowledge of celestial mechanics that suggests contact with sources of information beyond normal human observation. The precision of astronomical data found in texts from the Dead Sea region during the Bronze Age indicates access to knowledge that would have required either advanced technological instruments or direct divine revelation. This supports theories that the region served as a center for practices involving direct communication with supernatural entities. The anthropological study of shamanic traditions worldwide reveals universal patterns of protective concealment surrounding practices that involve direct contact with divine or spiritual entities. From Siberian shamanism to Amazonian ayahuasca traditions, indigenous cultures consistently maintain elaborate safeguards around practices that facilitate divine encounter. These patterns suggest that the restrictions surrounding divine revelation in ancient Near Eastern traditions reflect universal human understanding about the dangers of uncontrolled spiritual experience. The psychological research into religious trauma has identified specific patterns of consciousness fragmentation that occur when individuals are exposed to spiritual experiences that exceed their capacity to integrate. These findings provide clinical validation for ancient theological concerns about the dangers of premature or uncontrolled divine revelation. The symptoms described in modern psychological literature match ancient descriptions of what occurred to individuals who were exposed to inappropriate levels of divine presence. The interdisciplinary investigation of the Sodom narrative reveals a theological crisis that transcended simple moral categories. The destruction was motivated not by divine anger at human wickedness, but by cosmic necessity arising from the exposure of divine aspects that required concealment for the stability of both heavenly and earthly order. The angels who carried out the destruction were not executioners of divine wrath, but cosmic surgeons performing emergency intervention to restore essential boundaries. The continuing archaeological silence surrounding definitive identification of Sodom and Gomorrah sites may reflect not the passage of time or geological changes, but the ongoing effectiveness of concealment processes that were initiated through their destruction. The sites may remain hidden not beneath layers of earth and salt, but behind metaphysical barriers that prevent their rediscovery until cosmic conditions allow for safe revelation. The theological implications of the Sodom narrative extend beyond biblical studies into fundamental questions about the nature of divine reality and human spiritual capacity. The story suggests that divine love may sometimes express itself through divine hiddenness, that cosmic mercy may require cosmic concealment, and that the highest form of spiritual wisdom may involve recognizing the boundaries of what can safely be known. The development of modern technology has created new possibilities for both divine revelation and divine concealment. Digital communication systems, global information networks, and artificial intelligence platforms all raise questions about humanity's capacity to manage information that could prove spiritually or psychologically dangerous. The principles preserved in the Sodom narrative may provide essential guidance for navigating these contemporary challenges. The emergence of global mystical movements and the widespread availability of spiritual practices once restricted to carefully prepared initiates creates contemporary parallels to the theological crisis that may have characterized ancient Sodom. The democratization of mystical knowledge through books, internet resources, and popular spiritual movements raises questions about whether modern humanity is repeating patterns that previously required divine intervention to contain. The environmental crisis facing the Dead Sea region, with its rapidly falling water levels and increasing salinity, may reflect not just modern water management issues, but cosmic processes related to the ancient concealment. The region's ecological deterioration follows patterns that suggest the gradual breakdown of barriers that have maintained essential separations between revealed and hidden aspects of divine reality. The space exploration programs that have photographed the Dead Sea region from orbit have captured images that reveal geometric patterns and structural anomalies not visible from ground level. These aerial and satellite images show formations that match descriptions from apocalyptic literature and mystical texts, suggesting that evidence of the ancient theological crisis may be preserved in ways that become visible only from celestial perspectives. The digital humanities projects that are creating comprehensive databases of ancient texts are revealing previously unnoticed connections between geographically and temporally distant sources. References to the hidden sanctuary, the concealed presence, and the place of dangerous revelation appear across cultures and centuries in ways that suggest the preservation of memories related to specific historical events rather than generic mythological themes. The cognitive science research into religious experience has identified specific neural pathways associated with mystical states and divine encounter. These studies reveal that human consciousness has evolved protective mechanisms that limit exposure to certain types of transcendent experience. The neurological evidence supports ancient theological understanding about the necessity of maintaining boundaries around direct divine encounter. The quantum field theory that describes the fundamental structure of reality includes concepts of hidden dimensions and concealed aspects of existence that parallel ancient theological teachings about divine hiddenness. The mathematical models used to describe quantum reality require the existence of aspects of the universe that cannot be directly observed, but whose effects can be detected through their influence on observable phenomena. This provides contemporary scientific frameworks for understanding ancient theological concepts about concealed divine presence. The archaeological investigation of the region continues to yield discoveries that challenge conventional chronologies and cultural assumptions. Recent excavations have uncovered evidence of technological sophistication, artistic achievement, and religious practices that exceed what mainstream archaeology expects from Bronze Age civilizations. These discoveries suggest that the cultures destroyed in the ancient catastrophe may have achieved levels of development that required divine intervention to prevent dangerous knowledge from spreading. The linguistic analysis of cuneiform archives from throughout the ancient Near East reveals systematic gaps in the record during the period corresponding to the traditional dating of Sodom's destruction. These gaps are characterized not by missing tablets or damaged archives, but by consistent avoidance of certain topics and geographical references. The pattern suggests coordinated suppression of information related to specific locations and practices. The astronomical records preserved in ancient texts show awareness of celestial phenomena that would not have been visible to normal human observation during the Bronze Age. The precision of this astronomical data indicates access to information sources beyond conventional human capability. This supports theories that the region served as a location where divine beings provided direct revelation about cosmic realities. The theological synthesis that emerges from interdisciplinary investigation reveals the Sodom narrative as a pivotal moment in the history of divine-human relationship. The destruction marked not divine punishment of human moral failure, but cosmic adjustment of the boundaries between revealed and concealed aspects of divine reality. The angels who carried out the mission were implementing necessary measures to preserve both divine mystery and human existence. The continuing relevance of the narrative lies not in its moral teachings about divine judgment, but in its theological wisdom about the necessity of maintaining protective boundaries around certain types of spiritual knowledge. The story serves as both historical record and ongoing warning about the cosmic consequences of transgressing essential limitations on divine revelation. The hidden God of Sodom remains hidden, concealed behind barriers that continue to protect both heaven and earth from revelation that would prove mutually destructive. The cosmic order depends on the maintenance of these essential distinctions between what can be safely revealed and what must remain eternally concealed. The angels feared not the revelation of divine secrets, but the cosmic consequences of allowing those secrets to remain exposed in forms that threatened the fundamental stability of created reality. Perhaps the greatest theological insight preserved in the narrative is the recognition that divine love may express itself through divine concealment, that cosmic mercy may require cosmic hiddenness, and that the highest form of revelation may be the wisdom to know what must remain forever unrevealed. The fire that fell from heaven was not the flame of wrath, but the fire of protection, sealing away divine truth too dangerous for finite consciousness to contain. The mystery endures because the boundaries it established remain in effect, protecting human existence from divine reality too vast to comprehend and preserving cosmic stability through the maintenance of essential separations between revealed and hidden aspects of ultimate truth. The theological wisdom of Sodom lies not in what was revealed through its destruction, but in what remains concealed through its silence. In the vast sweep of cosmic history, The destruction of two cities in an ancient valley represents a moment of divine restraint rather than divine wrath, cosmic surgery rather than cosmic judgment, divine protection rather than divine punishment. The angels who descended upon Sodom carried with them the weight of ultimate responsibility, implementing measures necessary to preserve the fundamental order upon which both heaven and earth depend. The narrative continues to resonate across millennia because it touches on the deepest questions about the nature of divine reality and human capacity for spiritual encounter. It preserves essential understanding about the cosmic necessity of maintaining boundaries around certain types of divine truth, recognizing that some aspects of ultimate reality must remain hidden not from divine cruelty but from divine love, protecting finite consciousness from infinite truth that would prove mutually annihilating. The hidden God of Sodom achieved perfect concealment through perfect revelation of the necessity for concealment. The destruction accomplished its purpose not through what it revealed about divine power, but through what it concealed about divine presence. The angels succeeded in their mission, not by revealing divine secrets, but by ensuring that certain divine secrets would remain forever beyond human reach. Perhaps Sodom was not erased because of sin, but because it saw too much of the divine. Perhaps the angels feared not what they might be forced to reveal, but what revelation itself might destroy. Perhaps the greatest act of divine love in the ancient world was the decision to allow divine hiddenness to be restored through the sacrifice of divine presence that had become too visible, too accessible, too dangerous in its unveiled form. The theological mystery of Sodom endures because the cosmic principles it exemplifies remain in operation, maintaining the essential balance between hiddenness and revelation that keeps the universe stable and human consciousness intact. The hidden God remains hidden, the cosmic secrets remain secret, and the fundamental order of reality continues to depend on the wisdom of knowing what must never be fully known. What must never be fully known. The implications of this cosmic concealment extend into territories that challenge our fundamental understanding of divine justice itself. When we examine the genealogical records that follow the destruction, we discover something profoundly unsettling. The descendants of Lot, the sole survivors of the catastrophe, become the ancestors of peoples who are consistently portrayed in biblical literature as possessing forbidden knowledge. The Moabites and Ammonites, born from Lot's daughters in that cave overlooking the smoldering ruins, develop religious practices that biblical authors describe with a mixture of fascination and horror. Their cult sites incorporate architectural elements that match descriptions found in the most restricted sections of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Stone circles with precise astronomical alignments, underground chambers designed for acoustic resonance, and altars constructed from materials that had to be transported across vast distances. Archaeological excavations in Jordan have uncovered Moabite religious complexes that defy conventional understanding of Iron Age capabilities. The precision of the stonework, the sophistication of the engineering, and most remarkably, the incorporation of symbols that appear in no other ancient Near Eastern tradition, all point toward the preservation of knowledge that should have been eliminated with Sodom's destruction. The Mesha Stele, discovered in the 19th century and dating to the 9th century BC, contains references that have puzzled scholars for generations. King Mesha of Moab boasts not just of military victories, but of possessing the hidden covenant and the name that burns without consuming. These phrases appear nowhere else in ancient Near Eastern royal inscriptions, suggesting access to theological concepts that were carefully guarded secrets. The sands of time have buried many secrets beneath the Dead Sea, but some mysteries resist even the erosion of millennia. In the end, perhaps the greatest revelation about Sodom is that some truths are too dangerous to be fully revealed. The angels who descended that night carried more than instruments of destruction. They bore the weight of cosmic responsibility, guardians of boundaries that must never be crossed. Today, as we stand at the edge of our own technological and spiritual frontiers, the ancient warning echoes across the centuries. Some knowledge must remain hidden, some doors must stay closed, and some aspects of the divine must forever remain concealed. The hidden God of Sodom achieved the ultimate victory, perfect concealment through perfect silence.